Stay with me for a moment because what I'm about to explain isn't just another trade disagreement or political dispute. This is something deeper, more serious, and far more dangerous. For the first time in modern history, a sitting American president looked at the world's longest undefended border, 175 years of peaceful coexistence, at the closest ally the United States has ever had, and effectively said, "We don't need you. Canada needs us. We don't need Canada." Those weren't careless words, not a misquote, not taken out of context, not a slip of the tongue. It was a deliberate statement, delivered clearly, repeatedly, and with total confidence. And what makes this moment unprecedented is that it wasn't a one-time comment. He has said it again and again. He has built a narrative around it. He has framed an entire worldview around the idea that America would somehow be stronger, richer, and safer if Canada simply became the 51st state. But here's the part no one is really explaining. Here's what gets buried beneath headlines, outrage, and political noise. That sentence, "We don't rely on Canada," may be one of the most economically illiterate statements ever made by an American president on the global stage. And I'm not going to prove that with ideology, politics, or partisan framing. I'm going to prove it with numbers, with cold data, with infrastructure math, with supply chain reality. Numbers that don't care about nationalism, numbers that don't care about speeches, numbers that don't care about political theater. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly what's at stake when a superpower starts confusing confidence with reality. Let's start with energy, because energy is where the fantasy of independence crashes directly into economic reality. Every single day, 0.1 million barrels of Canadian crude oil cross into the United States. Not occasionally, not seasonally, not strategically. Every day. That is more oil than the U.S. imports from any other country on Earth. In 2024, Canada supplied 63% of all U.S. crude oil imports, 3%. That means nearly 2 out of every 3 barrels of foreign oil entering American refineries comes from Canada. And here's what most people don't understand. American refineries, especially the massive complexes along the Gulf Coast, are not designed to process any oil. They are engineered for heavy crude, the dense sulfur-rich oil from Canadian oil sands. This isn't about convenience or preference, it's infrastructure. These refineries were built over decades with billions in investment, optimized for exactly this crude type. So when Trump says America doesn't need Canada, he's saying the U.S. can somehow replace 4 million barrels per day of heavy crude instantly. From where? Venezuela collapsed, Mexico declining. The Middle East would mean rebuilding supply chains, reconfiguring refineries, and replacing stability with geopolitical risk. That's not independence. That's dependency on instability. And oil is only the beginning. Canada supplies 98% of U.S. natural gas imports. 98%. When homes in the Midwest heat themselves in winter, that gas is Canadian. When power plants in the Northeast generate electricity, that gas is Canadian. Decades of pipelines, decades of infrastructure. You don't replace that with a policy memo. And then there's electricity. Canada provides 82% of all electricity imported into the United States. States like New York, Michigan, and Minnesota don't treat Canadian power as backup. They rely on it to stabilize grids and prevent blackouts. The U.S.-Canada energy relationship alone was worth $151 billion in 2024. That's not exploitation. That's integration. That's system design. So when someone says, "We don't need Canada," what they're actually saying is, we don't need functioning refineries, we don't need winter heating stability, we don't need grid reliability, we don't need predictable energy supply, which is another way of saying we don't understand how our own system works. But energy is only one layer. Let's talk trade. Canada was the largest destination for U.S. exports in 2024. American businesses exported $350 billion in goods to Canada and imported about $413 billion. Yes, that's a deficit. But treating trade like a scoreboard is economic fantasy. When you include services, the deficit shrinks dramatically, and even that misses the real truth. Nearly half of U.S.-Canada trade isn't finished products. It's parts, components, raw materials, and intermediate goods. Supply chains crossing borders multiple times before completion. Take the auto industry. A truck assembled in Michigan may contain steel from Ontario, parts formed in Ohio, components processed in Canada, and final assembly in the U.S. That's not exploitation, that's integration. It's one production system across 2 countries. See, 6% of Canadian exports go to the US. Canada is dependent, but so is the US on that same system. When tariffs hit Canada, they hit US businesses, US factories, US jobs, and US consumers. After tariffs in early 2025, Canadian exports to the US fell 26%. But US imports also fell 20% in April 2025, the largest drop since 2009 outside the pandemic. That's not strength, that's economic shock. Manufacturers absorbed costs, profit margins collapsed, layoffs followed, and inflation pressures returned. But this isn't just economics. This is diplomacy, trust, security, and alliances. For the first time in modern history, a Canadian Prime Minister publicly said the United States is a country Canada can no longer trust. Trump didn't just threaten tariffs. He repeatedly spoke of annexation, treated Canada as property, as an asset, as something to acquire. This isn't diplomacy, it's delegitimization. 90% of Canadians oppose annexation. 2% would rather rejoin the British Commonwealth than join the US. Canadian nationalism is surging, boycotts are growing, travel is collapsing, businesses are diversifying away from US markets. Retaliatory tariffs are active. Provincial energy leverage was even discussed. And global analysts are now making comparisons they've never made before. Trump's language toward Canada is being compared to Putin's rhetoric toward Ukraine and Xi's rhetoric toward Taiwan. The idea that sovereignty is conditional and power justifies absorption. Allies are watching. If the US treats Canada this way, who is safe? Trust is the real currency of global leadership, and that trust is evaporating. So test the claim America doesn't need Canada. No Canadian oil means refinery crisis. No Canadian gas means heating crisis. No Canadian electricity means grid instability. No integrated supply chains means manufacturing collapse. Prices spike, inflation surges, blackouts rise, political chaos follows. This isn't hypothetical fantasy. This is structural reality. The US economy was built assuming Canadian reliability. And here's the deeper danger. When a nation convinces itself it doesn't depend on what it actually depends on, it starts making catastrophic decisions. History proves this again and again. Now, the US is testing the same logic. Can you alienate allies and stay dominant? Can you weaponize trade without blowback? Can you replace integration with coercion? So far, the answer is no. Economies are slowing, investment is falling, markets are nervous, and confidence is weakening. The 2026 CUSMA review is approaching. If that deal collapses, Canada faces depression-level contraction, and the US faces hundreds of billions in losses. Jobs disappear, prices rise, recession risk explodes. And for what? There is no coherent strategy, no clear policy goal, just leverage for leverage's sake. The real cost of "we don't need Canada" isn't trade deficits or tariffs. It's the erosion of credibility, the collapse of trust, the dismantling of integration. Once allies stop trusting you, they don't come back easily. Supply chains move, markets shift, investments relocate, and relationships realign permanently. History will look back at this period and see one sentence as symbolic. We don't rely on Canada. 3 words that summarize economic ignorance, strategic arrogance, political hubris, and structural misunderstanding. America may believe it doesn't need Canada, but reality doesn't care what anyone believes. The oil flows, the gas flows, the electricity flows, the supply chains move, the numbers exist, and reality always wins.